Philip Palumbo. I'm the host of the Palumbo Podcast, where we interview some of the most successful founders of businesses and professionals who are working with founders in various ways. Today, we are lucky enough and fortunate enough to have with us Alan Scharfstein. He's the founder and CEO of the DAC Group, one of the nation's leading middle market investment banks focused on mergers, acquisitions, and exit strategies for privately held businesses. Over the last 4 decades, Alan has personally led or negotiated hundreds of transactions across a wide range of industries in the U.S. and abroad, helping entrepreneurial owners maximize the value of what is often their life's work. Before launching DAC in 1984, Alan held senior financial and operating roles at PepsiCo and later at Universal Folding Box, giving him a rare combination of Wall Street level financial sophistication and hands-on operating experience in the real economy. He's a Wharton-trained economist with both a BS and MBA in finance, a frequent lecturer on selling privately held businesses and negotiation strategy, and he's been quoted in outlets like the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, the Financial Times, and Time. So, Alan, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it and looking forward to hearing about your experiences.
I'll look forward to this half hour or so.
Yeah, terrific. So, Alan, let's start with first, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about what exactly it is that you do as an investment banker.
We help privately held businesses, family-owned businesses, entrepreneurial businesses figure out how they maximize their value. And sometimes that means a sale of a business. Sometimes it means what you have to do to prepare for that. And the sale may not mean only to an outside party. It could be to your next generation. It could be to your management team. It could be really just figuring out how do we run this business so we maximize its value.
And love to start there about as far as maximizing value, because that's really important to a lot of these entrepreneurs and founders that have built their business over multiple decades. And here they are perhaps ready to sell. But the key thing that we always talk about all the time is if you're thinking about selling your business, what are the key things that you should be thinking about?
Well, the important thing when you think about selling your business is a few things. First, you have to think about what the buyer is going to want to see in the business. It's not just the way you've been running it, but it's really what's going to be appealing to a particular buyer. So you have to think of it in a buyer's mentality, number one. The other thing that's really important for business owners to think about is what's going to come after. What do they want life to be like after they sell the business? And again, there's more optionality today for business owners than ever before. So it's a question of, do you want to sell all of the business? Do you want to sell part of it? Do you want to stay in the business? And even if you want to exit it, you better figure out what you want to do afterwards, because retirement really is not something that works well for all entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's right. So let's talk about that. So life after selling. Again, I always say this, sell on Friday. What are you going to do with your life on Monday and thereafter? How do you recommend or advise on how founders should be thinking about life after selling their business?
It's one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking to owners about before they even engage us, because again, we want to make sure it's going to be the right thing for them to do. So we look at, several things. We look at when you're ready to sell your business, you look at, is it the right time in the environment, the economics, is your business performing at a high level? And based upon the age and activity of the owner, what does he or she want to do next? Some people have very specific goals in mind. Some people, have charitable intentions. Some people have intention of starting the next business and going on to the next phase of their lives. But really, it's a question of just thinking through what's going to fit and be right for you as an owner of a business. And by the way, one of the really important things to think about is to make sure that you plan far enough in advance, because if you want to sell your business in the next 2 to 3 years, it's really time to think about it today. Or even further into the future, you should be thinking about it, because, again, it's not something that typically happens overnight.
Yeah, the problem is, though, Alan, and you're right about that, is many founders sometimes pick up their head and they got a deal on the table, and next thing you know, they're signing an LOI. And the reality is, if they spent time cleaning up the business, improving the business, they can get maybe 1 or 2 turns more on their EBITDA numbers, right? And so it's really important for founders to, I always say, always be exit ready. So no matter, even if I'm looking to sell my business in 10 years, 20 years, right, always be exit ready. So if somebody was to come in and buy your business, right, your business is at what I call best in class.
Yeah, Phil, you're exactly right. The advice that we typically give to business owners is you want to run your business like you're going to own it forever, but be prepared to sell it tomorrow.
Yeah,
So
love that.
Getting all of those little things done that buyers are going to want to see that make you prepared, because you don't want to really look back and say, hey, there's been a knock at my door by a competitor, by a private equity firm, by someone who is ready to buy my business, has the dollars to do it, makes a lot of sense, but you need to clean it up. You can't say to someone, I need you to come back in 16 months once I've had some time to clean this up. You want to be able to take advantage of it if it's the right thing for you when the time is right.
That's right. And so when we think about a founder saying to you or other advisors that, hey, I'm thinking about selling my business in the next 2 or 3 years, or I want to become exit ready, what are the top 2 things that founders can be doing as it relates to their business to maximize the value of their business?
Well, there are several things. One are the basics. Okay, the economics of the business. Are you really running your business to maximize your earnings of your business? Because buyers are going to look at that, and that's going to be important to them. But they're also looking at other things in the business that are going to provide them with value. And that may mean let's understand what the strength of your management team is and how they can carry the business forward without you. Let's look at issues like customer concentration, which are going to affect your value, or dependency on a particular supplier that's going to affect your value, and whether or not parts of your business have recurring revenue, which is a real value to potential purchasers. So you want to look at those types of things. And one of the things that we often do with business owners is we put them through a little bit of a test run of understanding what a buyer is going to look at in their business, see how they're performing against those criteria. Mm-hmm. If you're performing against them well, you probably have a business that's going to be attractive the way it is right now. If you're not, you have the opportunity to clean those things up and fix them. And you're right, Phil, all those things will help to maximize the value of the business, may increase the multiple that people want to pay, may really result in a much better transaction for an owner.
Love it. I do. One of the areas when you think about recurring revenue, right? So obviously not every business has the opportunity to have recurring revenue because of the type of business that they're in. But if you sit down with a founder and you're looking at their business and you're saying that this business is very dependent on you, or you really haven't professionalized your business. You may be worth $50 or $100 million as business, but you haven't professionalized it. And so like strength of management you mentioned, which I agree with, what do you advise them? Because they may say, well, Alan, I'm not going to pay X amount of dollars for a CFO. I'm not going to pay X amount of dollars for a COO, or even hire someone to become CEO. So how do you talk through the professionalizing of their business, which essentially means building management that has strength?
Look, it's a conundrum for business owners, right? You don't want to spend money that you don't have to spend.
Right.
What you really want to do is take a look at some of these items and say, are these really expenses? Are they investments?
Right.
And one of the things that we can do is we can help the business owner assess whether it's a worthwhile expenditure. Are you going to get a return on this investment of the people or parties that you add to your team as you look at your business?
Right.
And Phil, I just sort of take you back to, how a buyer is going to look at this. If you really think about the way buyers are looking at businesses, they're looking at 2 things. They're looking at what's the opportunity for me in this business? Where can I grow it? Where can I take it? But on the other hand, they're looking for what are the risks of this business? What are the things that can sink me after I do this deal? So when I talked before about customer concentration, supplier dependency, management team, all those things go to the fact that if they are really performing at a high level, it's going to minimize the risk for the buyer, and therefore price is going to go up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It sounds like, Alan, and tell me if I'm wrong, right? There are coaches out there that build playbooks to help maximize the value of founders' businesses before they then hand it off to someone like you, let's say, or an attorney, a business attorney, et cetera. So these coaches, you pay them a decent amount of money, right? It could be 25 or 50 grand. And then they go in there, like I said, with experience to help maximize your business. Do you just do this? And what's the difference?
Again, there are some great coaches out there who can really help business owners perform at a higher level. And for years, we were asked by businesses that were not quite ready to sell. And we were making suggestions to them, and they said, but you know what? We really need someone who could help us implement these changes because it's, a business owner, I just don't have the extra hours in the day to do this, to do these other jobs. Let me figure out a different way. So actually what we did was we formed a group within our company called a Strategic Advisory Group, Strategic Leadership. And that actually is a group that when we see a business that is a great business, but isn't quite ready to sell yet and needs some help getting it tuned up, we actually can go in there and help them do that.
Just as a coach would do.
As similar to as a coach, but I think we do it a little differently because we have real perspective on how a buyer is going to perceive value and which of these changes is going to really create value. And so we're really focused on those few items that are really going to drive the value of the business when a buyer comes in there and wants to negotiate with you.
Right. So if you go into a business and you say, I want you to do, here's a bunch of boxes I want you to check, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It may take a founder how long to institute this in order to maximize the value of their business?
Look, in some cases, it's really not for the purpose of selling. It's really just to increase the value of the business overall. Sometimes it's to improve the performance of the business because their kids are coming into the business. Sometimes it's increase the performance of the business because they want to move it over to the management team. Sometimes it's just to increase their profitability because it's so hard as a business owner to sometimes look at your business from the outside and see what's got to get done. You're so involved in the day-to-day running of the business that you don't have the opportunity to sit back and say, what's really going to create value over here and how do I implement these changes? So, just like when it comes to selling your business, it really makes sense for business owners to bring in professionals who can help them do that because they don't do this every day of the week and they don't have the time in their day to do it. The same thing when you're trying to get your business performing at the higher level.
Is this a separate service that you will provide someone, even if you're not operating as their investment banker, to help sell their business?
Yeah, we don't. This is not necessarily tied to our investment banking actions. It's really just to help the business owner improve the operations of their business. And very often, as a result of that, they just they build a far more sellable business.
Yeah, it makes sense for you because you're building rapport and relationship. And when they're all ready, you're the guy.
Right. In our business, it's not unusual to have a 2, 3, 10, even 20-year relationship with a business before they're ready to sell. And sometimes we help business owners build value in other ways. Sometimes it's a question of, can we do some acquisitions that are going to be very accretive to your value? Are there going to be opportunities out there to build your business in a non-organic way that can really help you perform at a higher level? So we look at a business very holistically, try to figure out what's right for it. And I would say that we probably spent half our time talking business owners out of selling their businesses.
Wow. I remember you said that when we had a meeting together. Yeah.
Yeah. It's sometimes just too early for them. Sometimes they haven't thought of all the issues involved. And sometimes it's just a question of taking some of these pressures off of them so that they can really be more effective as owners and entrepreneurs.
So thinking about what you just said, so sometimes it's convincing owners, or many times, not to actually sell their business. What are the top 1 or 2 things that you see that you advise not to sell their business?
I see very often it's just too early in their business life for them to do it. They haven't really thought of what comes next and whether they're going to be happy doing the next thing in their lives. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes the business just has a lot more runway to grow. And to sell too early leaves a lot of value on the table. And then, again, some of these choices that business owners have today just give them more optionality than ever before. When I took a look at, I'll call it my father's generation of running a business, the choice was you ran your business until you're ready to retire. Eventually you sold it. And that was sort of the end of your career. In today's world, business owners are just selling their businesses at younger and younger ages.
Yeah.
One of the things I think we talked about previously is a decade ago, we were looking at business owners and our typical seller was 67 years old, selling because there were no kids going into the business. And that was it. Today, our average business seller is 52 years old.
Wow.
Which is staggering, right? You think about over a decade, the average age has dropped by 15 years. And why are they doing that? It's because not all of them are totally exiting the business. Some are staying on board, getting private equity, allowing private equity to help them grow their business, keeping active, but taking chips off the table today so that they can provide some safety and security for their family, but at the same time, gain some of the upside of doing a transaction.
Yeah, so let's talk about private equity because everybody's getting calls from private equity, including me multiple times throughout a quarter. And so let's, from your experience in founders dealing with private equity firms, do you more see situations where private equity companies come in and take a 30% stake in a business, or a majority stake, whether it's 50, 60, 70% or 80%, and giving 20% to the existing founders so they have skin in the game? What are you seeing more of?
It's highly unusual to see a private equity firm take a minority stake in a business. They want to control a position, and that's usually something, it's something more than 50%. And much of that depends on what the seller wants. But yes, private equity firms typically want sellers to roll some equity into the businesses, though we've done a number of deals of private equity have bought all cash and 100% of it, got 100% of the company. But typically they're looking for the owner to help them transition this business. And the reason I say that is in many cases, they just are, the financial firms that are looking to buy platforms really can't run them. They need business owner to run the business after they acquire it. They got to make sure they hang in there. But, the other thing that we're seeing in today's marketplace is so many of the private equity firms have already bought up businesses, and those platform companies that they have are now out there buying other businesses to bolt on to their platforms that they built, that they look at it very differently. They're looking at it as a strategic buyer, as opposed to just a pure private equity.
Wow, that's really interesting. So when it comes to private equity, if they take a majority stake, the founders typically staying on until the next exit, more or less.
In some cases, we have family situations. I think one that both you and I know about, Phil, where where one generation left the business upon the sale of the business, and the next generation stayed on board and helped to run the business. So the older generation was able to cash out. Younger generation was able to stay in and significantly increase the value of their holdings, with private equity funding some expansion and some growth of the business. So, every case is a little bit different. And I would say that every private equity firm is a little bit different. One of the things that I think we can talk about is there's a big fear of private equity out there. Some people think it's a great opportunity. Some people are pretty fearful of selling to private equity because we've all heard the horror stories that may be involved there. I typically tell clients are that, every private equity firm has its own DNA. Some are great people who I'd love to do business with. And some are people I will run for the hills if I were to be one of their partners. And, one of the things that we do is we understand the DNA of the different firms out there and are able to guide our clients as to who you want to do business with and who you don't.
What should founders be aware of when dealing with private equity firms?
Well, you have to understand first, they're usually really smart people, and they're experienced deal people. So one thing you want to make sure is you have the right team on your side that is used to dealing with them and evaluating them and what they want to do. And the second thing is you got to understand you have a really honest conversation with them as to what they're looking to do, how long they want to own the business for, what they intend to do with it. Do they intend to invest additional money into it?
Right.
How much leverage are they putting in the deal? So we understand the risk profile that's being created for the business, and how much of their own cash are they putting into the deal. And the final thing I would say is, and one of the big mistakes that business owners make when they sell to private equity is that they believe that due diligence is a one-way street, that the private equity firm can do all the due diligence they want on their business. And they really just have to, grin and take it.
Yep.
But you have to realize, as an owner of a business, when you're selling to private equity, especially if you're rolling equity and you're going to be one of their partners in this, you want to do as much diligence on them as they do on you. You want to talk to the other companies they bought. You want to talk to the owners. You want to see what life is like after the deal. You want to understand what happens if your business hits a bump in the road. How do they respond? Do they panic, or do they work with you? Those are the things that I think really make a difference. And again, if a business owner is doing their due diligence well, they're going to find a really good partner, whether it be private equity or strategic.
Let's talk about multi-generational planning, legacy planning for the business. So, for example, like with me, I came out of UBS January 17th to 2020. I mean, one of my main objectives of going independent, besides all the benefits to my clients and going independent, was to have this business for I had three boys, one, two, or three of them who were interested, have a business that can be multi-generational. That's kind of the objectives, one of the main objectives I had. But when it comes to turning the business over to the next generation, what are some of the negatives that you've seen and what are some of the positives that you've seen?
Well, number one, you have to make sure that the next generation is really capable of performing at the level that you need them to perform at. Bill, can they act as well as you have in running your business? Have you given the experience and the training to do that? And if they are, that's terrific. If they're not, you'll have some tough decisions in front of you.
Right.
Because you're going to have to decide whether or not, if they're not capable of doing it, how you explain to them what your next step is.
Right.
What you don't want to do is you don't want to put them in a position where they're going to fail.
Right.
That's not what you really want to do.
Right.
And I think businesses are challenged in that regard because even when they have a next generation in a business, sometimes not all of that next generation is in the business. Sometimes you may have one kid who's in the business and two or three who are outside. And that creates a whole nother family dynamic in terms of, is it fair to have your whole family's future dependent upon this one child and his success or her success?
Right.
So I think, there are a lot of family issues involved whenever you have this type of multi-generational family. And again, I think the most important thing is for you to be really honest with yourself as well as with your next generation as to what's going to happen, how it's going to work, and how you're going to evaluate whether this is really something that's going to work out for the long term.
I mean, the probabilities of a successful transfer to the next generation, the probabilities are pretty low that it will be successful. Do you agree with that?
I would say it varies tremendously. We're currently representing a fourth generation family where the fourth generation has performed at an awesome level. But you're right. It's unusual that businesses last more than into the second generation. And you really have to and the companies that have really been successful at it, again, go to the families that have really laid out the plan well, explained to the next generation, and really made sure that they were just setting the next generation up for success.
That's great. So, and what intrigued me about you the most was really when we talked about strategic buyers, right? And strategic buyers are really critical, especially to getting higher turns on the multiple, right, than a non-strategic buyer situation. And I don't know if you can quickly tell us about that story you told me with a client of yours that they thought that maybe they were going to get 7-8 times EBITDA, but then ended up getting like 12 to 15 because it was a unique strategic buyer situation. And they really sold for much more than they anticipated selling for. I don't know if you want to talk about that specific story or just strategic buyers in general.
Yeah, let's just talk about, how you think about a strategic buyer, okay? And really what you should be doing as a seller or your advisor should be doing when you're thinking of selling to a strategic buyer is not just thinking about what your economics are. Easy rule of thumb is people are going to tell you that in a specific industry, you should sell for a certain multiple of earnings, a certain multiple of EBITDA. But that's just, I'll call it the elementary school version of valuation. What you really need to be thinking of is how is the buyer going to look at this business and what do their economics look like? So if the buyer, for example, can eliminate a lot of overhead, that's going to drive their EBITDA upward. If the buyer can distribute your product over a much larger base of business, that's going to drive their EBITDA upward. If you can cross-sell between the two parties, that's great. Creates new sales opportunity, new valuation opportunities. So part of the challenge that we have when we look at strategic buyers is for us to figure out exactly what that strategic buyer is going to earn in your business. And if you're making, let's just say you're making $1 million profit in that business, and the buyer believes that they can make a $2 or $3 million profit, let's understand that. And we can understand that we can negotiate that into our price. And so a lot of this is really just putting ourselves in the buyer's shoes and hopefully being smart enough to understand how a buyer is going to value your business and where they're going to see real value in the business.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really, I mean, again, when you present it to us, I mean, that's why they're bringing you on board to uncover that value, to help maximize, like you said, to start this podcast to maximize the value of their business. And some of the ways that you do that is through your deep due diligence and understanding the buyer side of things, like you just talked about just now.
Yeah, that's the tough thing for business owners to do. One of the things to think about is that when a business owner wants to sell and they want to go through this process, it's a very time-consuming process. And it's a process that you're going to do once in your life, right? You're not going to do this that often. And to think about how you prepare the business and how you think about each buyer and how you present to each buyer and how you make the case to each buyer, which may be different. Every buyer may have a different case that you're presenting them as what the value proposition is to them. It's something that business owners have the experience of doing. And two is, for the most part, most business owners have a full-time day job. They're running their business.
Yep.
For them to take on this other responsibility is going to be a real tough thing for them to do and for them to do well. So, that's part of it. And the other thing that I would say about both buyers, both strategic and financial, is if the process is run properly of selling a business and you create competition, that can very often drive valuation up because, again, the value of business is worth what the buyer is going to pay for it. And sometimes just running a competitive process is what really creates value. And as you suggested, there have been cases where we thought a business would sell at a multiple of 5, 6, or 7 times EBITDA. But for the buyer, it became a multiple of 12, 13, or 14 times EBITDA because it was worth that much more to them and the opportunities it created for them.
Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific. So, Alan, this was excellent getting your perspectives on exiting businesses. I'm going to give you the last word to tell my audience more what they need to know about your firm, how to contact you, etc.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Again, to appreciate your time today.
Of course.
The DAC Group is a firm that I founded 40 years ago, and I founded it for a very specific purpose. What I found was that the world of M&A had great firms doing very large deals. The Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley's of the world were great at doing the billion-dollar deals. There were business brokers doing the small deals. But when you're in the middle, you have a entrepreneurial business, a family-owned business, a privately held business that is too small for the big boys to handle, but still needs a level of sophistication in terms of sale process, advisory, getting it ready, and running this whole process. There really weren't firms out there that I thought did that well. So 40 years I started DAC as a one-person operation in the basement of my house. And now we've grown to a firm with 37 professionals on board, having done over 800 transactions, all middle market, privately held transactions. Some selling to public companies, some selling to private companies, some selling to private equity. But we've really created a unique value proposition for these businesses. And if anybody out there wants to either talk about their business, what its future looks like, happy to do that. I'm sure. Phil, is there a note that goes with this podcast in terms of connections, or basically, if not, best way is to email me at Scharfstein, Scharfstein @ DAC Group, DAK Group.com.
My name is